Welcome to the Church of Obelisk. Dota 2 is a very hard game. There's a lot of ways to get better at this game, and most of them take a lot of work. You can improve your map awareness. You can practice combos with specific heroes to execute them more properly. You can learn how to micro better. There's 100 different ways you can improve, but most of them take a lot of work. What you're going to look at in this video is some ways that you can improve very easily, ways in which you can, especially if you're a bit lower MMR, if you're, let's say, below 3k, I think if you implement these simple itemization rules, you can probably gain like 300, maybe 500 MMR just from following some very simple rules. So let's get into those. The first is you need to buy more regen. Now, first of all, you need to buy plenty of regen to start. Sort of varies what role you play, what hero you play. If you're a core player in the side lanes, off lane or safe lane, you probably want 2 sets of tangos and possibly also a salve, maybe a mango or 2. If you're mid player, you're generally not buying any regen or very little regen at the start because you're using the courier a lot. As a position 5 player, you generally want to get 2 sets of tangos, share 2 tangos to mid, and then probably also buy a salve and maybe like a mango or 2. As position 4, it really varies a lot on what hero you play, so you can't really give any sort of general advice there. So this is something that a lot of people already do. As soon as you get to like 3k, most players are buying an appropriate amount of regen at the start. But here's the next part to buying more regen. You need to keep buying regen throughout the laning phase if you run out. Now, obviously, you don't want to just ferry out a courier for each set of tangos. You want to combine buying more regen with buying other items if you're in the side lanes. So let's say you're shipping out a Wraith Band or a Claws of Attack, coordinate with the other player in your lane, and we ship out several items together. Maybe ship some wards for the support and a Wraith Band and a Claws for the carry. And when you do that, also add in some extra regen if you're running out. Like add an extra set of tangos, an extra salve, maybe a mango or 2, maybe a clarity, because you need to keep up your health and your mana in the laning stage. Otherwise, you're just losing out. Because if your opponent is shipping regen and you're not, and you're trading a lot, at some point you're just going to run out of mana, run out of HP, and either you have to go back or you just die. And you don't want to be caught in a situation where you're like at 100 HP, at 200 HP, and you only have like 1 or 2 tangos left, and you're sort of waiting for a salve to be shipped out with a courier, and you're not really contesting last hits because otherwise you would just die. Avoid these situations by just buying regen proactively. And very importantly, and this is something that a lot of people even higher up in like 4k, maybe even some people in 5k, not really buying regen throughout the game. If you're a hero that wants to farm a lot and uses mana to do so, go and get yourself clarities. Like if you're playing Terrorblade, probably you want to farm from like the end of the laning phase until like 20 or 30 minutes into the game, and during all the time you should more or less constantly have a clarity going. And you do that by just shipping out extra clarities. Like if you get an extra item, you get your Yasha or something, and you have another 100 gold left, just buy 2 clarities. Your backpack is there for a reason. Just have 1 or 2 clarities, 1 or 2 salves with you to always get back up to close to full HP or mana, so you don't have to go back to base. Because, especially if it's a core, if you go back to base, you're losing out on a lot of farm, a lot of experience, you're not pushing out lanes, and your team loses map control because of that. And all that can be avoided by just investing a little bit of gold into salves and clarities. And it is really an investment. It's going to pay off because you're going to farm more because of that. The second easy thing you can do to improve your play a lot is to use your item slots. You have 6 item slots for a reason. And if you have 6 item slots, you should have 6 items. because small items are generally more efficient than bigger items. And yet, so often, if you look at low MMR, medium MMR games, you see people at 20 minutes running around with like 3 items in their inventory. Why? Why not buy some efficient items to put in those slots? So what are those efficient items? Obviously, if you're a melee hero, and especially if you're a core melee hero, you want a stout shield and a quelling blade. Quelling blade can also be quite useful on support, whether they're ranged or melee, because it allows for much easier dewarding. And then there's stick and wand. You basically almost always want to have a stick or a wand. It's such an efficient item, gives you 15 HP and 50 mana for each charge. So if you have a full wand that's 300 HP and 300 mana that you just get back, and it's only a 450 gold item. This is incredibly efficient. Obviously, if you're laning against a hero like a Bristleback or a Zeus, you want to get at least a stick ASAP, and against those heroes that spam spells a lot, you also probably want to upgrade it to a wand quite early on. But even if you're not against these heroes that spam spells in the lane, there's going to be lots of spells on the enemy team, so it's almost always worth it to buy a stick or a wand. Pretty much the only exception is if you're playing some sort of hero that just farms a lot and doesn't have a lot of contact in the early game with enemies, so you wouldn't build up many charges, and then later on you don't want the wand or the stick because you already filled out all your slots. So if you're playing a hero like Anti-Mage, for example, and you're playing as a lane that doesn't use very many spells, maybe you don't get a stick or a wand. But in like 90+% of games, you want at least a stick. Boost of Speed is obviously an amazing item. I don't need to tell any of you that. Boost of Speed is probably the second most efficient item in the game after TP Scroll, because movement speed is just such an important stat in this game, and Boost of Speed is the most efficient way of getting movement speed. In a similar vein, Windless is also a very efficient item. Not quite as efficient as Boots of Speed, but still a very efficient item. Another great item is Urn of Shadows. A lot of people, when they think of Urn of Shadows, think primarily of the active, and the active is great. It's basically, in terms of healing, it's 60% of a salve, or you can use it to do damage instead. It's not a huge amount of damage, but it's something, and it's such a cheap item. And also, of course, very importantly, it interrupts blink daggers. But Urn is not just the active. Urn also gives very decent stats for its price. You get 2 to all stats, 2 armor, and 1.5 mana regen. That's amazing. That's almost as much mana regen as a Void Stone, and the Void Stone costs about the same as an Urn, and all it does is give you mana regen. And then there are Bracers, Null Talismans, and Wraith Bands. I mentioned these last because they're generally not as efficient as the other items I talked about before, but they're still great to fill your remaining slots. If you're playing an Agi-core, you basically almost always want to buy at least 1 Wraith Band, and how many you want to buy depends on how many other early game items you're buying and how many slots you've left. So if you're a melee hero, you probably want to have a Quelling Blade and a Stout Shield, and you want to have boots, a stick or wand. That's already 4 item slots reserved, so you really only have place for like 1 or 2 Wraith Bands. And if you're buying 2, that all means that you very soon have to replace one of your other items. So oftentimes with melee heroes you see them only buying a single Wraith Band, sometimes 2. But with ranged heroes, you often see them buying as many as 3 Wraith Bands, sometimes even 4, although that's rare. Null Talismans are great on int heroes that do a lot of damage to their spells because they have Spell Amp. And Bracers are great not only on strength heroes, but also on heroes that are just afraid of getting bursted. So if you're playing a support and you find yourself in the early mid game being bursted and you don't really have the money to afford something more substantial like Glimmer Cape, you can just buy a Bracer or 2 that will tie you over into the mid game, until you can buy stronger defensive items. And what all three of these items do is just bulk you up. They're just going to make you slightly stronger. That means you're winning more fights. All these fights in your games where you're not buying these items, where you're just badly dying, your opponent gets away on 100 HP, or you just don't have quite enough HP to survive, or you're just running out of mana and you can't cast that last spell. All those fights you are going to win if you buy these stat items. And of course this list is not exhaustive. There are other efficient early game items that you can also get. Like a Raindrop is an excellent item. Orb of Venom is often a great item to get. I'm just listing some of the main items you want to get in the early game. And just general, if you're buying all these efficient early game items and your opponents are not, you're just going to dominate early fights, you're going to farm faster, and your enemies who are saving up for a big item, they're going to get this item only slightly earlier than you are going to get your big item, because they're losing out on all this early game efficiency. And if you have a Yasha, a Wand, and 2 Wraith Bands, and your opponent only has a Yasha and another 1000 gold saved up for the next big item, you're going to win the fights every time. That's why if you look at pro play, they're all utilizing the item slots. They're all getting these efficient early game items, which allows them to farm faster, accelerate faster, win early game fights, and just dominate anyone who's foolish enough not to buy these efficient early game items. And then my third and last major point is buy more team items and fewer selfish items. More items to enable your team and less items to make fancy plays yourself. Now this is especially advised for people playing position 3 to 5. If you're playing position 1 or 2, this applies much less obviously. The first big category here is aura items. Take an item like Vlad's for example. What you very often see, especially in lower MMR games and also in some higher MMR games, is that either you have some sort of hero, typically an offlaner, that wants to get an early Vlad's, like a Beastmaster or a Tide Hunter, because they just benefit a lot from that item personally. Or if you don't have any of these heroes, just no one buys the Vlad's. And that's wrong. Vlad's is not just an item you get early on. Some heroes you can rush a Vlad's, that's fine, but even if you don't have any hero that wants to rush Vlad's, you still want Vlad's eventually on your team. And it's perfectly viable to buy Vlad's on a position 4 or 5. It doesn't mean you have to rush Vlad's on that hero. You can buy other items first, but eventually, once you get to like 30, 40, 50 minutes, you do want a Vlad's. So Vlad's is not an early game item. It's fine in the early game, but it's an item that's good throughout the game. There's all these percentage-based auras, gives you mana regen, which is useful throughout the game, gives you armor, which is useful throughout the game, and then it has this percentage-based lifesteal and damage. Obviously, these abilities scale with the damage, so they're good throughout the game. These auras are great throughout the game. And if you're playing position 5, or a position 4 that doesn't farm very much, you're going to have enough item slots, even in late game, to be able to afford to have a Vlad's in your inventory. And that's just going to really help out your team win fights and gives them the sustain so that they can keep pushing after one fight. Then you have Mech stroke Greaves, you have Pipe, and you have Crimson Guard. These items are the kind of items that win your team fights. These items can prevent or heal a tremendous amount of damage. If your team has these kinds of items and the enemy team does not, you're going to have a huge advantage in fights. Now you don't always need all three of them. Sometimes you're just playing against a lineup that has very little magic damage, or a lineup that doesn't right click a lot, but probably you want at least 2 of these on your team. And Pipe especially is amazing. Pipe is not just a necessary item if you're playing against a hero like Zeus. Pipe is also great against most teams, because it's going to be very rare that you're playing against a team that doesn't have magic damage. And Crimson Gun is especially good if you're playing against a team that has a lot of fast attackers or a lot of summons that attack, Although you have to watch out that the damage block from Crimson Guard does not work against wards. So against Shadow Shaman, against Venomancer, damage block doesn't do anything against their wards. But if you're playing as heroes like Beastmaster, Lycan, Chen, and especially Visage, Crimson Guard is amazing. And then there's Medallion and Solar Crest. These items were nerfed severely in the last 2 patches, but they're still very decent items to get. They used to be way overpowered, and now they're fairly balanced. Previously, always wanted to buy Solar Crest and Medallion, whereas now it's more like, does it fit into this particular game? Solar Crest in particular is quite an expensive item, but it's very much worth it if you can put it on some sort of carry hero that really benefits a lot from it. So if you can put Crest on a hero like PA, Alchemist, Lifestealer, these kinds of heroes that want to be in the front line and therefore benefit from the armor, but they also need attack speed, then it's a great item. Whereas if you have a hero like Drow Range, for example, she does appreciate the attack speed, but she already has plenty of attack speed. And she generally wants to stay at the back, so she's not really getting hit, and once the enemies jump her, an extra 8 armor is probably not going to make much of a difference because Drow is just so squishy. Or if you have a hero like Naga or Phantom Lancer that's just very illusion based, Solar Crest doesn't do as much because it's only buffing the main hero and not the illusions, and also sort of giving away where the main hero is. But if you have a hero that really benefits from this buff, definitely get a Solar Crest, usually on your offlaner. But if your offlaner doesn't want to get it, you can also get it in the position 4 or 5 as sort of a luxury item later on in the game. As a corollary of buying more items for your team, it means buying fewer items that just benefit your own hero. So what are the items I'm talking about? I'm talking about items like Blink Dagger, like Yule Scepter, like Heart. It's kind of items that allow your own hero to do cool stuff, but they don't necessarily help your team as much. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying never buy Blink Dagger or never buy Yule Scepter. Obviously that's nonsense. Obviously there are some heroes that just really benefit from these items, and there's some games that really call for these items. But I'm just saying put less emphasis on those kind of items than most people are doing, especially in lower tier games. Like if you're playing an Earthshaker, you just need a dagger. Unless you're going for Aghanims, then maybe you don't need a dagger right away. But just the main thrust of Aghanim is just to look not just on what your hero needs, but what your team needs, especially if you're playing position 3, 4 or 5. So for example, if you're playing Night Stalker off lane, you really want to get an Axe. That's a really great item for your hero, you do a lot of more damage in fights, you farm quicker. Aghanims is great on Night Stalker. But sometimes your team just needs you to buy some different item. Maybe your team just needs you to buy a pipe because you have a lot of magic damage in the enemy team. And you just have to get that pipe because otherwise you just can't fight. Because as position 3, typically it is your job to get these kinds of aura items. Because you're the one who has enough farm to do that, and simultaneously you don't need to scale as hard because you have position 1 and 2 to do that for you. If you look at pro games in the last couple of years, you see a market decline in Blink Dagger purchases. I'm not saying Blink Dagger is never bought anymore, but it's bought less frequently and usually later. The reason for that is first of all Blink Dagger was nerfed, and second of all aura items were buffed. In particular the increase to the aura AoE from 900 to 1200 made aura items a lot better. And yet in pub you still see stuff like a Tidehunter rushing a Blink Dagger. I'm not saying that's always wrong, but in like 98% of games it's wrong. Yules is not a bad item, but it's a very selfish item. It gives you a lot of mana regen, it allows you to save yourself by using the Cyclone ability, it allows you to purge debuffs from yourself, but it doesn't really help out your team. You can't use teammates. Yules is a fine item to get in particular heroes, like in Alina for example, to set up your stun, but I see a lot of players in lower mass are just sort of getting a Yules for no particular reason. And that's just bad. It's quite an expensive item for a support, and it doesn't give the sort of stuff that most supports really need. Yeah, to some survivability, but not as much as a Glimmer Cape would in most circumstances, and the Glimmer Cape is considerably less expensive. and also allows you to save your teammates. And the mana regen is nice, but you don't need as much mana regen on most heroes, so you can just buy clarities. Heart is a great item on a select few heroes. A hero like Phantom Lancer, Naga, CK. These illusion heroes benefit a lot from having these tanky illusions. They also, particularly in the case of Phantom Lancer, heroes that sort of go in and out of fights, and you sort of get out of a fight, have your regen kick in, and you can go in again. And for that, Heart is great. But Heart is a very selfish item. It's not the kind of item you just go casually. You often see things like an axe just going for a heart. I'm not saying Heart is a terrible item, an axe, but it's more of a luxury kind of item. It's an item that's fine to get as like a 5th or a 6th item, but really you like need your blink tag, your blade mail, and like 1 or 2 aura items to benefit your team, and then maybe you can buy a heart. And even then there might be better items to get still. And if you implement all 3 of these concepts, you can see a marked improvement in your play and your win rate, and you can probably win a couple hundred MMR if you implement all of this. And it's easy things. This is not complicated. Just follow this advice and you will win more games. I promise you. This is not going to turn you into a great player overnight, but it will markedly improve your game with very little effort required. Another way you can improve your game is by joining the fold and subscribing to this YouTube channel, especially if you're interested in Shen, but I'm also doing some videos with more general content like this one. In that vein, take a look at this video I did about a very unknown and unappreciated mechanic in Dota that most people are not aware about, and that is attack and armor types. And you can also take a look at this video where I explain how you can get easy wins playing Shen and Alchemist together. Until next time, may Obelisk protect you.